we study the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the first thing we are told is that Ibrahim alayhi salam did not get along with his father even as a child, because his father was a polytheist. He loved to make and worship idols, but Ibrahim alayhi salam, even before being designated a prophet, he used to only worship the one true God. So while his father always insisted that Ibrahim alayhi salam should also participate in the worshipping of idols, Ibrahim, even as a child, had a lot of questions. He would reflect and ponder regarding the authenticity of the idols. In other words, he just could not understand why he should be worshipping idols as gods when he knows that these were statues created by his own father. How could they have a divine-like status when they were created themselves by a human being? Now, one of the questions we could ask is, why does Allah even tell us this about Ibrahim alayhi salam? We understand that Ibrahim alayhi salam, even prior to being a prophet, never worshipped idols. He always worshipped the one true God. But that is true of all of the prophets. That is not just true of Ibrahim alayhi salam. All of the messengers that Allah sent never engaged in the worship of idols at any point in time. So what is so unique? What is so special about the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam? When you look at all of the prophets, there is one big difference between their childhood and that of Ibrahim alayhi salam's. For example, when you look at the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was a child, before he was separated from his family, he was raised by Yaqub alayhi salam, his father, who was also a prophet. So he had the basic understanding of Islam. Besides that, we also know that he was taught the true interpretation of dreams and that at a very young age, Allah was communicating with him. For instance, when Yusuf alayhi salam was thrown into the well by his brothers, and he was all alone at a very young age, Allah did inform him that very soon, you will be telling them about this affair of theirs while they do not perceive. So there was some kind of means by which Allah was communicating and consoling him. There was some form of guidance being given to him. Similarly, when you study the story of Yaqub alayhi salam, we understand that he had a very strong understanding of Islam at a very young age because he was raised by his father Ishaq alayhi salam, who was also a prophet. Sulaiman alayhi salam had Dawud alayhi salam as a father, who was a prophet and who taught him about Islam. Dawud alayhi salam as a child was raised in Bani Israel at a time when Bani Israel had become an ummat, so he automatically was informed about Allah and about Tawheed. Now Musa alayhi salam was not raised with his family, he was raised in the Pharaoh's house. But based on Jewish literature, what we understand is that his brother Harun alayhi salam used to frequently visit Musa alayhi salam in the Pharaoh's house, and that is where he taught him a lot about Tawheed and the teachings of Yaqub and Yusuf alayhi salam. So given the fact that Bani Israel was living in Egypt, this proves that although many people were worshipping idols in Egypt at that time, there were also many people, in other words Bani Israel, who were worshipping the one true God. So there was information available regarding Tawheed. Similarly, with Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, we know that at a very young age he became an orphan. His father passed away before he was born. His mother passed away when he was very young. But again, just like Musa alayhi salam, in the region where Muhammad, peace be upon him, was being raised, there were idol worshippers and there were also Hanifs. And Hanifs means monotheists, people who only worshipped one God. In fact, it's believed that Muhammad, peace be upon him, his grandfather Abdul Muttalib, he was also a Hanif. So again, he was raised in an environment where there was knowledge of Tawheed, there was knowledge of the one true God. But for Ibrahim alayhi salam, his story was entirely different. He was raised in the city of Ur, which is believed to be a city in present-day Iraq, and everyone in that city used to worship idols. Not just that, but Ibrahim alayhi salam's father was a primary idol maker. He was responsible for making the idols and selling it to people. So clearly, in a city where everyone is worshipping idols, and the father who is raising this child is also not just worshipping but making idols, Ibrahim alayhi salam had to challenge the norms from a very, very young age, simply by asking the right kind of questions. For example, how can these idols be divine? How can they be gods if they cannot see and hear? How can they be gods if they cannot even protect themselves and they need to be fed by human beings and they need to be protected by human beings, otherwise they could just fall and break? How could they be gods who created the entire universe and everything inside of it if they themselves were created by human beings? Because that would mean that the creator of everything was in fact not a god, it was a human being. And of course, the more Ibrahim alayhi salam would ask, the more difficult it was for people around him to answer because they didn't have an answer. And we could always ask, was it just Ibrahim alayhi salam who was asking the right kind of questions? He had aql, he had intellect, but so did everyone else. So why was he the only one asking the right kind of questions? And the answer to that is simple. Everyone else was distracted chasing this life. They were too busy trying to please their elders, trying to please the chiefs of the city, trying to get more money for themselves, trying to pursue their own dreams. And when you're distracted so much, you don't have time to ask the right kind of questions. You don't have time to ponder and reflect on what is more significant, on the purpose of your life. In fact, just by studying the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the very first message that Allah is teaching us is that even if you have never heard the message of a prophet, even if you have never read a book that has been sent by God, just by thinking, just by asking the right kind of questions, anyone will be able to come to the natural conclusion that this entire universe and everything inside of it must have been created by one God, and the fact that that God is so powerful that He's made everything, He must be asking something from us in exchange. There has to be a purpose for this. He could not have created something for no reason. This is why the concept of tadabbur and reflection is so important in Islam. This is why Allah keeps telling us to study, to read the Quran, and to ask questions. On the contrary, many of us at a very young age are told to not ask questions, to blindly just accept whatever we have been taught. That is contrary to the lesson that we learned from the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. In fact, we are told, keep asking. Keep trying to research to find the answers to your questions. If you're asking your elders and they don't know the answer to those questions, that doesn't mean the answers don't exist. That doesn't mean that there's a problem with the religion. It just means you have to do more research. You have to start investigating more in order to find the answers to your questions. Unfortunately, many of us today are making the same mistake that the people of Ibrahim alayhi salam's nation were making several thousands of years ago. Just like they were distracted and they didn't have time to reflect, we are distracted and we don't have time to study the Quran. When we are told to spend even a couple of minutes just studying tafsir every day, we simply respond by saying we have exams. We have our career that we need to focus on. There are so many other things that we have to do in terms of society that we just don't have time for this right now. We will do it later at an older age when we have settled down and we've passed all of our exams. And interestingly, many of us know that we still might not have time. There's still no guarantee that 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we will be able to make time for tafsir. There's no guarantee that we will even be alive at that time. In fact, many of us also know that chasing society and our exams and career is actually exhausting. It's mentally draining and it's causing depression and anxiety. And just like the people of Ibrahim alayhi salam's nation, who knew that the questions Ibrahim was asking were genuine questions, and they didn't have answers to those questions, but instead of pondering and reflecting, they chose to ignore him and simply move on. They chose to tell him that this is what we have seen our ancestors doing from the very beginning of time. This is what we were taught when we were young, so this is the way it's supposed to be. It might not make sense, logically, rationally, but this is what we have to do. So just blindly follow our ancestors. That's exactly what we do. We know that the questions being asked to us are genuine. We know that chasing society ends up in depression. We also know that we might not ever get time to study tafsir and that the akhirah depends on that. But very conveniently, just like the people of Ibrahim alayhi salam's nation, we respond by saying this is what we have been told to do. Ever since we were young, we have been told that the only thing that matters are exams, career, pleasing society, and that's it. Coming up to the standards and expectations of the people around you, that is the only thing that matters. Nothing else compares to that. And even though logically and rationally it doesn't make sense, that's what we have been taught, so that's what we choose to blindly follow. We choose to worship exams, career, and society, even though we know that these gods can never give us true satisfaction. Even though we know that these gods cannot protect us when something bad happens. Even though we know that all of these gods are powerless as compared to the one true God, but we still choose to blindly worship them as idols. So the very first lesson that we learn from the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam is that you need to make sure that you take out time to reflect and ponder on God's message, to reflect and ask yourself what is the purpose of your life, and to reprioritize your goals. Career, exams, and society are all important, but they are not the only and the most important thing. And for those of us who wonder, when will Allah give us guidance? Is Allah ever going to give us guidance? Just remember, all you have to do to get guidance is start pondering, start reflecting. The other people in Ibrahim a.s. nation did not receive guidance not because Allah chose to not give it to them, but simply because they didn't bother to ask the right kind of questions. They were too distracted and they chose to blindly worship their idols. Assalamu alaikum.